Section 9 of Highways in Hiding by George O. Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. I put a lot of miles between me and my recent adventure before I stopped to take stock. The answer to the mess was still obscure, but the elimination of Nurse Farrow fell into the pattern very neatly. Alone, I was no problem, so long as my actions were restricted to meandering up and down the highways and byways, peering into nooks and crannies and crying, "Catherine!" in a plaintive voice. No one cared. But when I teamed up with a telepath, they moved in with the efficiency of a well-run machine and extracted the disturbing element. In fact, their machinations had been so smooth that I was beginning to believe that my discoveries were really an assortment of unimportant facts shown to me deliberately for some reason of their own. The only snag in the latter theory was the fact of our accident. Assuming that I had to get involved in the mess, there were easier ways to introduce me than by planning a bad crack-up that could have been fatal, even granting the close proximity of the Harrison tribe to come to the rescue. The accident had to be an accident in the dictionary definition of the word itself. Under the circumstances, a planned accident could only be accepted under an entirely different set of conditions. For instance, let's assume that Catherine was a Mekstrom, and I was about to disclose the fact. Then she, or they, could plan such an accident, knowing that she could walk out of the wreck with her hair barely mussed, leaving me dead for sure. But Catherine was not a Mekstrom. I'd been close enough to that satin skin to know that the body beneath it was soft and yielding. Yet, the facts as they stood did not throw out my theory. It merely had to be revised. Catherine was no Mekstrom, but if the Harrisons had detected the faintest traces of an incipient Mekstrom infection, they could very well have taken her in. I fumed at the idea. I could almost visualize them pointing out her infection and then informing her bluntly that she could either swear in with them and be cured, or she could die alone and miserably. This could easily explain her disappearance. Naturally, being what they were, they cared nothing for me or any other non-Mekstrom. I was no menace. Not until I teamed up with a telepath, and they knew what to do about that. Completely angry, I decided that it was time that I made a noise like an erupting volcano. With plans forming, I took off again towards Yellowstone, pausing only long enough at Fort Collins to buy some armament. Colorado is still a part of the United States where a man can go into a store and buy a gun over the counter just like any other tool. I picked out a Bonanza .375 because it is small enough to fit the hip pocket, light because of the new alloys so it wouldn't unballast me, and mostly because it packs enough wallop to stop a charging hippo. I did not know whether it would drill all the way through a Mekstrom hide, but the impact would at least set any target back on the seat of his pants. Then I drove into Wyoming and made my way to Yellowstone. And one day I was driving along the same road that had been pictured in Dr. Thorndyke's postcard. I drove along it boldly, loaded for bear, and watching the highway signs that led me nicely toward my goal. Eventually, I came to the inevitable missing spoke. It pointed to a ranch-type establishment that lay sprawled out in a billow of dead area. I eyed it warily and kept on driving because my plans did not include marching up to the front door like a rug peddler. Instead, I went on to the next town some 20 miles away, which I reached about dark. I stopped for a leisurely dinner, saw a moving picture at the drive-in, killed a few at the bar, and started back to the way station about midnight. The name, dug from the mailbox, was Macklin. Again I did not turn in. I parked the car down the highway by about 3 miles, figuring that only a sigh of doctor's degree would be able to dig anything at that distance. I counted on there being no such mental giant in this out-of-the-way place. I made my way back toward the ranch house across the fields and among the rolling rock. I extended my perception as far as I could. I made myself sensitive to danger and covered the ground foot by foot, digging for traps, alarm lines, photocell trips, and parties who might be laying in wait for me. I encountered no sign of any trip or trap all the way to the fringe of the dead zone. The possibility that they knew of my presence and were comfortably awaiting me deep within the zone occurred to me, and so I was very cautious as I cased the layout and decided to make my entry at the point where the irregular boundary of the dead area was closest to the house itself. I entered and became completely psi-blind. Starlight cast just enough light so that I could see to walk without falling into a chuck hole or stumbling over something. But beyond a few yards, everything lost shape and became a murky blob. The night was dead silent, except for the occasional hiss of wind through the brush. Esper-wise, I was not covering much more than my eyes could see. I stepped deeper into the zone and lost another yard of perception. I kept probing at the murk, sort of like poking a finger at a hanging blanket. It moved if I dug hard enough in any direction, but as soon as I released the pressure, the murk moved right back where it was before. I crouched and took a few more steps into the zone, got to a place where I could begin to see the outlines of the house itself. Dark, silent, it looked uninhabited. I wished that there had been a college course in housebreaking, prowling, and second-story operations. I went at it very slowly. I took my sweet time crossing the boards of the back veranda, even though the short hair on the back of my neck was beginning to prickle from nervousness. I was also scared. At any given moment they had the legal right to open a window, poke out a field piece, and blow me into bloody ribbons where I stood. The zone was really a dead one. My Esper range was no more than about 6 inches from my forehead. A motion picture of Steve Cornell sounding out the border of a window with his forehead would have looked funny. It was not funny at the time. But I found that the sash was not locked, and that the fly screen could be unshipped from the outside. I entered a dining room. Inside it was blacker than pitch. I crossed the dining room by sheer feel and instinct, and managed to get to the hallway without making any racket. At this point I stopped and asked myself what the heck I thought I was trying to do. I had to admit that I had no plan in definite form. I was just prowling the joint to see what information I might be able to pick up. Down the hall I found a library. I'd been told that you tell what kind of people folks are by inspecting their library, so I conned the book titles by running my head along a row of books. The books in the library indicated to me that this was a family of some size with rather broad tastes. There was everything from science fiction to Shakespeare, everything from philosophy to adventure, a short row of kids' books, a Bible, Encyclopedia Britannica, published in Chicago, in 54 volumes. But there were no places that were worn that might give me an idea as to any special interest. The living room was also blank of any evidence of anything out of the ordinary. I turned away and stood in the hallway, blocked by indecision. I was a fool, I kept telling myself, because I did not have any experience in casing a joint, and what I knew had been studied out of old-time detective tales. Even if the inhabitants of the place were to let me go at it in broad daylight, I'm not too sure that I'd do a good job of finding something of interest, except for sheer luck. But on the other hand, I'd gotten nowhere by dodging and ducking. I was in no mood to run quivering in fear. I was more inclined to emit a bellow just to see what would happen next. So instead of sneaking quietly away, I found the stairs and started to go up, very slowly. It occurred to me at about the 3rd step that I must be right. Anybody with any sense wouldn't keep anything dangerous in their downstairs library. It would be too much like a safecracker storing his nitro in the liquor cabinet, or the murderer who hangs his weapon over the mantelpiece. Yet everybody kept some sort of records, or had things in their homes that were not shown to visiting firemen. And if it weren't on the second floor, then it might be in the cellar. If I weren't caught first, I'd prowl the whole damn place, inch by inch, avoiding, if possible, those rooms in which people slept. The fifth step squeaked ever so faintly, but it sounded like someone pulling a spike out of a packing case made of green wood. I froze, half aching for some perceptive range so that I could dig any sign of danger, and half remembering that if it weren't for the dead area, I'd not be this far. I'd have been frightened to try it in a clear zone. Eventually I went on up, and as my head came above the level of the floor, everything became sky-clear once more. Here was as neat a bit of home planning as I have ever seen. Just below the level of the second floor, their dead area faded out, so that the top floor was clean, bright, and clear as day. I paused, startling at it, and spent a few moments digging outside. The dead area billowed above the roof out of my range. From what little I could survey of the dark psi area, it must have been shaped sort of like an angel food cake, except that the central hole did not go all the way down, only to the first floor level. It was a wonderful setup for a home. Privacy was granted on the first floor and from the road and all the surrounding territory, but on the second floor there was plenty of pleasant, esper-clear space for the close-knit family and friends. Their dead area was shaped in the ideal form for any ideal home. Then I stopped complimenting the architect and went on about my business, because there, directly in front of my nose, I could dig the familiar impression of a medical office. I went the rest of the way up the stairs and into the medical office. There was no mistake. The usual cabinets full of instruments, a laboratory examination table, shelves of little bottles, and along one wall there was a library of medical books. All it needed was a sign on the door, S.P. Macklin, Medical Scholar, to make it standard. At the end of the library was a set of loose-leaf notebooks, and I pulled the more recent of them out and held it up to my face. I did not dare snap on a light, so I had to go at Esper. Even in the clear area this told me very little. Esper is not like eyesight, any more than you can hear printed words or perhaps carry on a conversation by watching the wiggly green line on an oscilloscope. I wished it was. Instead, Esper gives you a grasp of materials and shapes and things in position with regard to other things. It is sort of like seeing something simultaneously from all sides, if you can imagine such a sensation. So instead of being able to Esper read the journal, I had to take it letter by digging the shape of the ink on the page with respect to the paper and the other letters, and since the guy's handwriting was atrocious, I could get no more than if the thing were written in Latin. If it had been typewritten or with a stylized hand, it would have been far less difficult. Or if it had been any of my damn business, I could have dug it easily, but as it was— "Looking for something, Mr. Cornell?" asked a cool voice that dripped with acid sarcasm. At the same instant, the lights went on. I whirled, clutched at my hip pocket, and dropped to my knees at the same time. The sights of my .375 centered in the middle of a silk-covered midriff. She stood there, indolently, disdainful of the cannon that was aimed at her. She was not armed. I'd have caught the Esper warning of danger if she'd come at me with a weapon of some sort, even though I was preoccupied with the book full of evidence. I stood up and faced her, and let my Esper run lightly over her body. She was another Mekstrom, which did not surprise me a bit. "I seem to have found what I was looking for," I said. Her laugh was scornful, but not loud. You're welcome, Mr. Cornell. Telepath? Yes, and a good one. Who else is awake? Just me so far, she replied quietly, but I'll be glad to call out. Keep it quiet, Sister Macklin. Stop thinking like an idiot, Mr. Cornell. Quiet or not, you'll not leave this house until I permit you to go. I let my Esper roam quickly through the house. An elderly couple slept in the front bedroom. A man slept alone in the room beside them. A pair of young boys slept in an over and under bunk in the room across the hall. The next room must have been hers. The bed was tumbled, but empty. The room next to the medical office contained a man trussed in traction splints, white bandages, and literally festooned with those little hanging bottles that contain everything from blood plasma to food and water, right on down to lubrication for the joints. I tried to dig his face under the swath of bandages, but I couldn't make out much more than the fact that it was a face, and that the face was half Mekstrom flesh. He is a Mekstrom patient, said Miss Macklin quietly. At this stage he is unconscious. I sort of sneered at her. Good friend of yours, no doubt. Not particularly, she said. Let's say that he is a poor victim that would die if we hadn't found his infection early. The tone and expression of her voice made me seethe. She sounded as though she felt herself to be a real benefactor to the human race, and that she and her outfit would do the same for any other poor guy that caught Mekstroms, providing they learned about this unfortunate occurrence in time. We would, Mr. Cornell. Baloney, I grunted. Why dispute my word? She asked in the same tone of innocent honesty. I eyed her angrily and felt my hand tighten on the revolver. I've a reason to become suspicious, I told her in a voice that I hoped was as mild-mannered as her own. Because 3 people have disappeared in the past half-year without a trace, but under circumstances that put me in the middle. All of them, somehow, seem to be involved with your hidden road sign system and Mekstrom's disease. That is unfortunate, she said quietly. I had to grab myself to keep from yelling, "Unfortunate?" and managed to muffle it down to a mere voice volume sound. People are dying of Mekstroms because you're keeping this cure a secret, and I'm batted from pillar to post because... I gave up on that because I really did not know why. It's unfortunate that you had to become involved, she said firmly. Because you... It's unfortunate for everybody, I snapped, because I'm going to bust you all wide open. I'm afraid not. You see, in order to do that, you'll have to get out of here, and that I will not permit. I grunted. Miss Macklin, you Mekstroms have hard bodies, but do you think your hide will stop a slug from this? You'll never know. You see, Mr. Cornell, you do not have the cold, brittle, determined guts that you'd need to pull that trigger. No? Pull it, she said. Or do you agree, now that you're of age, that you can't bluff a telepath? I eyed her sourly because she was right. She held that strength that lies in weakness. I could not pull that trigger and fire a 375-inch slug into that slender, silk-covered midriff. And opposite that, Miss Macklin also had a strength that was strength itself. She could hold me aloft with one hand, kicking and squirming, while she was twisting my arms and legs off with her other hand. She held all the big cards of her sex, too. I couldn't slug her with my fist, even though I knew that I'd only break my hand without even bruising her. I was in an awkward situation, and I knew it. If she'd been a normal woman, I could have shrugged my way past her, and left. But she was determined not to let me leave without a lot of physical violence. Violence committed on a woman gets the man in Dutch, no matter how justified he is. Yet, in my own weakness, there was a strength. There was another way out, and I took it, abruptly and without forethought. End of Chapter 9.